Hello, and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah-Donalds, and today our guest is Elizabeth Byrd, who is a past life regression therapist and an influencer on TikTok. Her main topics are Gnosticism and the Matrix. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you, Dahlia.
So tell me, Elizabeth, I've seen tons of your videos. I really like a lot of the information that you share on TikTok. Can you tell me a little bit more of how you began, I guess, researching this topic, or how you became interested in learning about the Matrix?
Like many in our modern day, I actually started my sort of spiritual awakening through psychedelics. I don't necessarily use them anymore so much, but I did go through a season of my life starting from, I think I was like 17, maybe around 18 when I started taking psilocybin mushrooms, and that definitely sped me along. So that's kind of, I like to say, like, you don't need that stuff, but they definitely can sort of crack you open and accelerate your awakening journey, because it creates an creates an experience where you can't deny it. Like, you're physically in it, right? Because so many people can have suspicions, they can have things, but with a psychedelic experience of plant medicine, you like, you're in it, there's no denying what's happening to you. And I started having random synchronistic experiences with other people, actually, while I was taking them, sometimes homeless people, actually, and which sounds very strange, I know, but I like to think of that Bible verse where it's like, you don't know when angels are among you. And it kind of felt like that, because sometimes I would be doing them by myself, and I'd get approached by someone and they would start telling me stuff like random, spiritual insight. And I'm like, whoa, I'm like, whoa, what's happening? But like, I felt like maybe either they were an empty vessel and something higher came through. Maybe they were tuned and tapped in, but in the matrix, they looked like they were, just kind of like, that's where it started to really make me wonder, like, what is going on here? Like, something is picking up that I'm on a higher frequency and it's sending me messages. That's very much how it felt. And I actually had one experience with a homeless man named Milton, and I called him Milton the Glitch, because I was on one with my friend. It was kind of his first time taking mushrooms, and I was with him, and we were kind of in the thick of like the pickup, where it starts to get really intense. And this homeless man started walking around us, and we were both like really like weirded out. And then he started approaching us. And slowly, like, it felt like this distortion that was over his face kind of cleared out, and he was no longer super weird looking. He was just like a normal, human being. And I noticed he had like a crystal on his neck, and I started getting intrigued, and we started talking, and it was very strange because he would try to talk to us, and like, he mumbled a lot. Homeless people tend to mumble, and he would like mumble kind of, and you kind of have to like tune in. And then and it was weird because as soon as he was about to drop something, it's like a plane would fly by, or like a really loud car. And I'd be like, wait, say that again, and it was like, it really felt like he was like glitching out the system, and something was trying to like prevent whatever he was coming through say. So that was really like my first hand experience with the fact that something is really weird about this reality, and all is not what it seems. Now, I don't use mushrooms anymore, not that I am against them, but I have just gotten to a place where I'm more in a integration. I prefer to be sober, but I had fond memories. I have nothing negative to say about them. That's just sort of my experience. And I do not think that everybody needs them in order to have these sort of little awakenings. But for whatever reason, at a young age, I was meant to kind of come to these conclusions that would lead me on my spiritual journey and lead me to start asking questions. That was another thing, was Milton actually gave me a whole list of things to research. And I have this little picture in my phone of like a piece of paper that I had found, and like wrote down all these little words he was saying that I had no idea what they meant. A lot of it was things like reincarnation, past lives, different star system, the Pleiades, things like that. So yeah, that sort of accelerated it, but I was already kind of asking questions, already pretty curious. But then experiences like that definitely made me just stop and be like, whoa, like something's going on here that we can't explain.
It's interesting because, like, when you see people who sometimes are homeless in the street, and you ask them a simple question, because I've seen interviews like this, and all of a sudden they just come up with all this knowledge, and then it makes you wonder, like, well, how did you end up here? But if you've ever been targeted by the Matrix, you can understand how they ended up there, because sometimes this is what will happen. I think people who know a lot, the goal of the Matrix is to make you look like an outcast or someone that no one else would listen to. So it's fantastic that you actually took the time to actually hear him out, because in the end, it's what kind of pushed you along in your spiritual journey. So after this occurred and you started, having these questions, were you already studying to do past life regressions, or this came after?
No, that came quite a bit after. That was like sort of my intro into past life regression. I didn't get into past life regression until like 2020, 2021. So like 3 or 4 years later, actually. I would say actually Milton, I met at like 18, 19, 18. And so I was a little older. It was a little after I started doing mushrooms. So it wasn't my first experience. And then yeah, I started digging into past lives. I heard of Dolores Cannon eventually, who is a famous hypnotist who did, probably about 20 books on her sessions with different people in hypnosis and their past life experiences. And it fascinated me. And one of the first ones that I like listened to on audiobooks was Jesus and the Essenes. And that one really gave me pieces of like the Jesus story that I always felt was missing. And it, as I was coming through my own spiritual awakening, getting those pieces, I was like, of course, this is like, what Jesus, because I still like had this love for Jesus, but obviously was branching into more new age, say, beliefs and ideas and things like that. So that's kind of what connected me to Dolores as well. And I started going through, deeper, darker, like dark night of the soul type lessons, where my a lot of my trauma from my childhood, a lot of the karmic ancestral wounds were like coming up for me. My partner was a trigger for that. My husband, we were just dating at the time, and a lot of things were surfacing. I was kind of living in this very just very lost place where like nothing made sense. I was just in like pure depression. And I just had all these questions, and all these things that I needed to understand. And I decided I wanted to do a past life regression on myself, because I just felt like something in my past life was triggering this. And so I looked up, I'm in Sacramento, so I looked up and there was a few, but they were kind of expensive. And then through some kind of Facebook group that I was a part of, I met this lady who was actually certified in past life regression. And I was like, no way. I started talking to her. I was like, how did you even get certified? Like, how do you do that? I didn't even know like they were like, that was just something you can do. I didn't know how people got into it. And then she said there's a course online. So I put it on my credit card. I signed up, and I basically became certified in doing it myself. And through that, I met a woman who then did a session for me. And it definitely gave me some pieces of the puzzle of my life that I needed to know. I knew it was like a calling on my heart to get certified, to get the work done on myself. Past life regression, I would say, is not always for everyone, but people who can benefit it know that it would serve them. Like there's a call inside of you like this, there's some answer there that I need to know. And that's how they get led to the whole process in the first place. But not everyone, needs to know certain things from their past lives. And the beauty is through hypnosis, you actually, through Dolores's technique, you connect to your higher self, and your higher self knows what's going to be best for you when it comes to showing you certain things from your past. It's not going to show you things that are going to confuse you, that are going to make you get more depressed. It's going to show you only things that will serve you in this lifetime, because that's its priority, is to help you through this life, this current time. So that's a really beautiful process, and it's definitely been very cool and interesting. I'm kind of just getting back into it after a little break. But yeah, that's kind of my little journey with it, and it's been really fascinating for sure.
Well, previously on my show, I had Brunel Landrum on, and she was talking about reincarnation, and we were like going through that. And of course, modern day traditional Christianity, they don't consider it part of doctrine, right? But there have been so many experiences, so many tales of people and children coming back, expressing like things that they felt happened to them in a previous life that is really hard to ignore. I've never had any like past life regression, but I'm a big dreamer, and I swear to this day, I will say that I feel like sometimes like certain dreams that I've had about certain things, especially when I was younger, I felt as if those were like, I don't know, previous lives or something like this, but I can't prove it. But I still kind of, like go in that direction of feeling that, yes, like we have had previous lives before. And for whatever reason, we're here again. But this is where the part with the Gnosticism and Christianity come in, because you also stated that before you had this awakening, you also had a love for Jesus. Did you grow up Christian? Were you practicing, or what was it like in your home?
Yeah, I totally grew up Christian. So I'm Slavic American. So I was born in a little country called Moldova, right next to Ukraine. And basically, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. That was like my parents were living through that basically. And they had me in 2000, so I'm a 2000 baby, and in 2001 we moved to America. So just like 6 months after I was born in Moldova, we moved to the United States, straight to Sacramento, California, with a huge population of other Slavic immigrants, because just right after the Soviet Union dissolved, everyone wanted to go to America. They were, there's a lot going on. And so around the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a huge influx in Slavic immigrants, and a lot of them they settled in little communities around the states. And I was a part of a pretty big one here in Sacramento. So we have dozens and dozens of Slavic churches, we have Slavic schools, like we have a huge, and my entire apartment complex was actually filled with Slavic people. So I grew up in a Russian village, is what they called it, where everyone spoke Russian. Obviously we were all like Moldovan, Ukrainian, Belarusian, all these, but we were all united by that trauma of being under the Soviet Union. So I grew up, very much encompassed by that culture. Everyone was Christian. I mean, you had two options. You were either Baptist or Pentecostal. Some people were Orthodox, but mainly those were the two denominations that were at least within my community. Most of the people there were village people. We weren't like big city folk. We were like small little villagers that all congregated. And that's actually how we even got to America, was through the church. You had to get invited in by people from like they would have churches come, and then they would call people in, and you would need, I don't know how that whole process works, but just that's kind of my understanding. And so yeah, very much grew up. And Slavic people are very conservative. Like I like to say we are behind on a lot of things. Like, and it traditionally we are on the level of maybe pre-boomers, like whatever generation is before boomers. So like I connect to my husband's parents a lot, and they're in their late 60s, early 70s, but I feel like I was raised kind of like them, because we are so traditional and behind that we had similar morals and values like instilled in us. So we're pretty old school. And so that means we're very conservative. I mean, no piercings, no tattoos, no obviously smoking. Like everything was very like to the point, where American Christians are considered very, hypocritical in our eyes. They didn't do card games because it was gambling, and like they're very culturally conservative. And so yeah, I grew up very deep in that. Everyone went to church. And, my parents, I would say, were a little on the more relaxed side, though. They still enjoyed a little bit of alcohol. My mom was a little bit more provocative with her clothing. Like, she wasn't super, wearing like the head covering. She was a beautiful woman. She liked to dress nicely. And they like to have fun. They were young. I would say they were almost like probably considered like black sheep in the eyes of some of people in my culture. Like, and they didn't go to church like religiously. Like we would go on Sundays, at least as a kid. But the older I got, the more they kind of got a little bit more relaxed. Sometimes we would skip a Sunday. Whereas I had friends and family that would go 3 times a week, every week, Monday, Wednesday, like Sunday, they were in choir. They went all the things. My parents were a little bit more laid back on that end. And I didn't really grow up religiously reading the Bible. Like I had a picture Bible as a kid, and I learned about it in Sunday school, but my parents, like I said, so I wasn't like super, super indoctrinated, but I was still a part of it. Of course, like Jesus part of my life. I just didn't feel this like, very conservative, strict relationship, nor did I feel like a very, I would say, deep relationship. Like I look back to my early teens, and the way I connected to God most was worship. I was always a singer, so I loved to sing. But sermons, things like that, groups, I was always a little bit like shy and insecure. And so I didn't get into youth. I kind of was a little isolated when it came to that kind of stuff. And so around 16, 17, my relationship with my parents was pretty rough throughout my high school years. I was homeschooled, and just my sleep schedule was falling behind. Things were kind of not looking according to how they wanted my life to be. And I just started talking back a lot. I was going through my teenage years, and we had a lot of, like there's a lot of abuse in my house, and a lot of just what Slavic people consider discipline would be looked at as abuse in, you know, today's households. And so there was a lot of that. And, you know, I was the oldest child. I only had one little sister who was 7 years younger than me. So a lot of the aggression, the anger, all of it got taken out on me. And there was no one to kind of split it up onto. There was no one to protect me. There was nobody there. So it was kind of it kind of traumatized me a little bit, you know, obviously. And it made me not respect my parents. Like I didn't have very much respect at all. And I started to really rebel. Like around 15, 16, like I started getting into their liquor cabinet. I started, you know, wanting to smoke cigarettes. I just had this deep desire to get a cigarette. I don't know why. No, none of my friends did it. Maybe it was a past life thing. That's kind of where I think I'm like, maybe I died as a smoker and I came back needing to like live that lesson out, because I had this just yearning for cigarettes. And I eventually got into smoking weed, and I ran away at like 16, 17 because I just couldn't handle it. And so when I ran away, you know, I was living with my boyfriend. I was doing things I wasn't supposed to be doing. And that's when I really pulled away from the church, because I was like, I'm being a hypocrite. Like I'm having sex, like I'm doing all these things I know I'm not supposed to be doing. I'm not going to go to church because I know I'm not living according to how God wants me to live. And so I kind of just like, you know, locked that piece of myself away. I did try to go to church a couple times. I tried to get my boyfriend to go with me, and we went. And like, I think the topic literally was about premarital sex. Like the one time I went, and I was like sitting there, like, oh my goodness, you know, I was like feeling so called out. And so I was like, no, like I don't know. I can't do this while I'm still making these choices. But a part of me knew that this rebellion was necessary. Like my parents were begging me to come home, and I was like, guys, like I can't explain it, but I need to be on my own right now. I need to get out. Like I just had this deep need to be free and like figure my shit out basically. And then after my ex and I broke up, I moved back home. It was about like almost a year later. Like I was almost 18 or almost 17, sorry. And I moved back home. I made a new group of friends, and they were older, and they were part of my culture. Like they were Romanian. So they were like cousins to like my culture. A lot of them were older, and I made this one really good friend who he was very deep and just had this old soul, and he connected with me. He was a lot older than me, but he was kind of like a mentor for me, like an older brother, you know? And he was very I would say spiritually attuned, but he also was like agnostic or atheist, right? And then I made another friend at the same time who also happened to be Slavic, like I was, but atheist by choice. And I was like, whoa, like two people who grew up just like me, who I respect because they were very smart. I felt like I could have the deepest conversations I was able to have than with anybody else. Because at my age, I was very mature and I wasn't able to connect with a lot of people on the level that I wanted to. So for the first time, these two people who I really respect, all of a sudden, I'm finding out don't even believe in God. And I'm like, whoa, you know, and so they kind of start showing me I'm like asking questions. They're showing me their reasons. They're showing me videos and all this stuff. And that's when I kind of came to the conclusion. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, religion is kind of silly. Like the whole idea of God, it's crazy, of course, you know, and it sort of gave me peace because I was no longer being a hypocrite. I had the freedom to live however I wanted to live. Right. And it was through that I believe that was a necessary part of my journey, letting go of like the structure of God that I had been taught completely, you know, just allowing myself to no longer be under the shame and guilt, no longer be afraid, like things like that. But I would say the one thing that I really felt was I was smoking cigarettes at that time. And it was right around the time that I like stopped believing in God. I simultaneously started losing my voice through smoking, my singing voice, my speaking voice, my singing voice. I just continuously kept getting bronchitis, getting sick. I was smoking menthols, which I think like honestly made it worse because they're like minty and they were like really like messing with my voice. And so I couldn't sing for like a couple years. I went on struggling to quit and not being able to sing. And singing was always how I connected to God, like I said, worship. And so that was a deep, painful lesson to me, you know, and something that I experienced is like, oh, like I let go of this belief in God because I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. And then I got the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do, but it had consequences, natural consequences. And that really stung, you know, deep down, and also hindered the way I knew how to connect to God, which was through singing. And then it was through that time period that I eventually did start taking psychedelics. It was around that time. So it was like a couple months after. And that was really when I started to wonder, like, is there something more, because I would feel just this loving presence. I would feel so connected to nature. I just felt this like yearning in my heart. Like that's actually how I started connecting to God again, was through the medicine. I would typically do them by myself. I would go to a creek. Like I didn't really like how other people were on them. They're always weird. They're always going through their demons and all their shit. And I was like, yo, I'm just trying to like, this was church to me, and that's why I felt like God would sometimes send me like little people to keep me company, because it was very alone and isolating. And at the time, like I wasn't really finding that connection anymore. Those friends that were like the ones that convinced me to leave God, the relationships started to get strained or different or distant. And it was like no longer feeling that need anymore. I started seeing holes in their like their beliefs. And then that's when I basically started to wonder if there was a God. And then it took me doing another level of psychedelics, which was DMT, where I had one experience. I didn't really do it much, but I did it one time. And that's when I fully cracked open and I was like, oh my God. And I felt like I met God or the essence of God. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it was beautiful and it felt completely safe and all encompassing. And I was in utter awe. And all I could say was, wow, thank you. And it felt like everything that I'd gone through in my life that led me to that moment made sense now, because I was meant to like see this. And from that point on, like I knew there was a God. So it's kind of strange because again, like I am sober now. I promote sobriety, but a lot of my journey did stem from plant medicine and different psychedelics, So again, not to say that you need that stuff, but that is just my personal experience. That's how God used those tools to reach me in points where I was, at different lows. And again, having that undeniable experience, that is something that you just, you can't rationalize away. You can't, it's just, there's no denying it. And so that's sort of how I came back to the belief in God. And then shortly after is when I met Milton the Glitch. That's when I started looking into reincarnation, looking into the Matrix, looking into all of that type of stuff. And it went on like that for a while, where I was very deep in the new age, right? Like past lives, chakras, energies, tarot, all that stuff, And but then I started going through my dark night of the soul, and a lot of things were coming up. I was going through this really difficult couple years actually, and it was tied in with also hormonal imbalance, where I had pulled out my birth control implant and I started experiencing PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's kind of a newer thing, but basically a lot of women are coming out saying that they're struggling. We're about 2 weeks out of your cycle, you're feeling pretty much crazy. Like the thoughts consume you, you get paranoid, and it felt like I was like being almost, I wouldn't say possessed, because I didn't feel like something outside of me was, but it was like my voice, the inner voice. I could not shut it up, and it was just bringing up like so much things. And I was living in the past and I was replaying all the hurt and all the wounds, like all these things that had happened. And that's when I started to really kind of go back to Jesus. And it was through this text called A Course in Miracles. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's kind of controversial. Like if you did a quick search, Christians will say it's demonic, it's this and that. But to me, A Course in Miracles is nothing but a message of love. And to me, so the thing about Course in Miracles, the theory or the belief is that basically Jesus came back, and not came back, he's alive and well, right? Let's say Jesus is a presence that is watching over humanity, guiding us, being a guide, right? An ascended master, however you want to look at it, a savior, ascended master, leader, whatever. And in the 1970s, I think during like the, whole awakening of, the first kind of wave of the hippie generation, Jesus came back through a woman named Helen Schuckman, who was like a psychologist. And she started hearing an inner dictation, which is just like a voice in her head that didn't sound like her own voice. And she started to just write whatever it said down, basically. And over time, she realized that this was Jesus. And the story goes, the backstory is that Jesus and Helen knew each other when he was here on earth as Jesus the man, right, in Nazareth. And she was, I think, a scribe during that time. And they had made a contract, a soul agreement, that at a later time, he would come back and reveal more teachings, because he knew that his message was going to get misconstrued. In real time, it was happening in front of his eyes. People were taking his message and already like not understanding it. So he's like, I'm going to have to come back at a later time. So he made a deal, a contract with Helen, that at a certain time, he would come back and she would be the one to scribe what he had to say when people were ready for it, when people were willing to receive it, right? So he admit to Helen, like, hey, this lifetime wasn't exactly the one I had in mind. It's still a little too soon. You might not be quite ready for the stuff that's going to come through, but we're trying to speed things along because humanity needs this. And he saw like a little opening, so he took it. And so Helen herself was very uncomfortable with the teachings coming through her. She was like, she was raised a Jew. She had no belief in Jesus. She was an atheist at that time. So what was coming through her was like, whoa, this contradicts everything I know to be true. So she was quite uncomfortable, but she knew it was part of her path. And so she wrote it down and she compiled an entire text of teachings that are foundationally Christian in nature. They talk about Christ, they talk about the Holy Spirit, they talk about God, the Heavenly Father, but it's kind of like the whole idea of Christ being a consciousness, something we can attain. And through this text, it actually undoes the ego, undoes the thought system of this reality, of this matrix. And it helps you realize that this reality is just an illusion, right? And I think that's something that you wanted to talk about is like, is this reality an illusion? I do believe that. And I believe this book, the way it was written, it's kind of written in a repetitive way. It's kind of written in a way that it's not super, it doesn't make sense to your conscious mind. It goes through the back door straight to your unconscious and repatterns your belief system. And I'm telling you, it is just a message of love. It is a message of unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness to your brother, to anyone, and basically union with God, like reuniting with God, getting past the ego's illusions, all the, things that it's created. And so that book, I was led to reading it during my dark night of the soul. And when I started to read it, I knew like there was something in this that was going to help me. And that's when I kind of really reconnected with Jesus, was through this text. To me, this is what I wish scripture was, this direct connection to Jesus, where I felt like the words, now mind you, Helen and Jesus, like in the book, it is said like, this is not meant to be idolized. This is not meant to be put as like how people view the Bible as this immaculate text. It was still coming through Helen. And they said that, Helen would write things down and then they would go over and Jesus would be like, no, I said this word, you put that word, but I actually said this. So they would like correct what her mind was like, trying to kind of get out. So there are, of course, mistakes and different things. And so I don't view it as like the end all be all. But to me, this text really changed my mind. That's really what it was. It changed my thinking. It changed my belief system. And it's written in a way that is meant to do that. And so that book led me back to Jesus. And then I started going through this questioning of like, well, if Jesus is real, and I started going through this sort of scary realization that this reality was maybe not what I thought it would be. That was simultaneous. I had like a really bad mushroom trip, and it was my last trip. And it was in a really low place. You're not supposed to do mushrooms when you're in that state. And I was crying and I was just in a really bad place. And I closed my eyes and I was laying on the floor and I started tapping in and out of this reality. And where I started feeling like I was overhearing a conversation somewhere else. Like I was me, but somewhere else. And I started feeling like I was tapping into some alternate reality, right? Where I was living a different life. I didn't see anything. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew like I was tapping in and out. And I'd heard this message like, well, if it's too difficult, if this life is too difficult for you, you can always opt out. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, felt very matrixy, right? Just end game, restart, get a new avatar. I was like, whoa, I was not ready to hear that. And it honestly freaked me out. And then I also, after getting freaked out, continued to just sort of be crying and afraid at this point and not understanding what was going on. I was all by myself. I started to see like a matrix. I started to see, it felt like an ant farm or a beehive. And it felt like there was this like queen bee or this leader at the top. And all of us were just dreadlessly working. And it was like, and to me, it clicked like this is the cycle of reincarnation. And to me, it felt like, whoa, if this is real, like God is not a good God. Like that's what it felt like. I was like, God is not good. Mind you, I'd never heard that theory anywhere. I'd never heard that God could not be a benevolent, amazing, loving father. And I had the Course in Miracles like on my table and I had just barely broken into it, like a page or two. Like I was so new, but I was looking at it and I just knew like I was mad at it. I was like, I don't understand like what's going on, like this book and like this experience, like what is happening. And So I kind of live with that. I mean, I had to pick up the pieces. I actually relapsed. I just quit like vaping and smoking weed for a little while. And I relapsed after that because I was like, nothing matters. Who cares? I might as well opt out. Like I was considering like questions like that were going through my mind. Do I just call it quits? Do I just give up? But I was afraid, like, what does that mean? Would I die in this reality? What would happen to the people I love? Right. And anyways, I basically shortly after was led to the Gnostic texts. Through I was reading the course already for a little while, but I was led to the Gnostic text because I was having a conversation with a Christian girl. I was sharing about my beliefs a little bit more openly on Instagram, and I'd never really shared like my views on Jesus. This was kind of like my coming out because most of my followers were still people from my community, Russian people that I grew up with, like people who knew me as the good Christian girl. They didn't know my past, they didn't know my background. And so I started kind of sharing my story on there. And this girl really resonated. I didn't know her personally. She was like, I knew her through Twitter, and she was like, wow, I relate. And she's like, wow, I totally rebelled. And like as I'm posting my stories, but then I get to the Jesus portion at the very end, and she's like, oh, well, she's like, I also kind of was like that too in New Age and stuff. But then I realized that, Protestantism is like the end all be all, the path to God, and the Bible is 100% immaculate. And she's like, I'd love to have a conversation with you about it, a non-emotional conversation. And I was like, okay, sure. Like, why not? And so we started chatting in DMs, going back and forth. And through that, I genuinely got on my knees and I prayed because she was so confident. She was so like, she had all the facts. She was very well researched. She was a very smart person. And she was like, this is why the Bible is 100% true. And something in me just like felt like, no, but I prayed and I was like, God, humble me. I have been wrong in the past. Show me now, show me clearly, like, is the Bible 100% immaculate? Like I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I don't want to spread misinformation. I don't want to lead people astray. Like I don't want to share more about this if it's not your truth. So God, reveal it to me. And as I continue talking to her over the next couple days, I somehow or another got led to the Gospel of Thomas. And I was like, Gospel of Thomas, like that doesn't sound familiar. Mind you, I'm not like super well versed in the Bible, but I was like, that's not in the Bible. And so I started reading it and I'm like, whoa, this stuff's interesting. And then I like do a quick Google search and it's like, yeah, it's part of the Gnostic text. They weren't included in the Bible. I'm like, wait, there's gospels that were not included in the Bible. Like, why? Why would they not include them? And so I, started reading more of them. I'm like, oh, that's why they don't want to include them. Like this stuff talks about what I know. Like this stuff talks about reincarnation or, it talks about gnosis and inner divine knowledge. And that's where I was like, whoa, okay, like there's something to this. And so I thank her to kind of inspiring that, revelation, although it led completely opposite to what she was hoping to accomplish, which was to convince me that the Bible is 100% true. I only got confirmation that that was not true at all. And so I was grateful to God. Now, I will say, I don't believe 100% of the Gnostic texts are 100%. I don't look at any text the way Christians look at the Bible. I do not put them, I don't create an idol out of any message. I believe there are many sects of Gnosticism. They all had varying beliefs and views. Gnosticism is that was a label that was put on them later on. They were all just people who thought they were Christian, and they all had varying interpretations of Jesus's message. But a lot of what was in Gnosticism actually confirmed what the Course in Miracles taught, which I felt was as close as I could get to Jesus's direct message. And it taught Course in Miracles doesn't go deep into like all the theories and things, but it does say that God didn't create this reality, that God could not create a flawed reality. That's incapable, like God is incapable of that. So that confused me. And then the Gnosticism gave me kind of answers to that. I'm like, oh, maybe something else created this reality. And so, yeah, I don't remember how we, delved into that, but that's sort of my journey. I tried my best to keep it, shortened and, but I know that kind of went on off the deep end.
No, that was like perfect. And there's you unpacked a lot of things there, right? So I'm gonna go rewind and then we'll come back forward. So
sure.
I can imagine, like, especially growing up, because I have relatives who are Pentecostal and I grew up Catholic, and I'm actually one of the people who you might catch me going 2 or 3 times a week only because I'm a mom and I try to teach them the traditions. But even though I do this, my first, let's say, lesson in the household is making sure they understand the idea and the concept of our energy and our consciousness and all of that. Because one thing is the tradition, and one thing is really understanding what's going to uplift you and push you through this life, because right now there's a lot of stuff going on to create a lot of distractions for a lot of us. And it's fantastic in a sense that even though it would have been considered a non-conventional way of finding Jesus, you eventually did regain your love for him in all of this, even though it wasn't maybe the way most people might think. So as far as what you explained also, when you said you were like tapping in and out, now in my theory, I consider this to be like trance, you know, and it's similar also, I guess, if you have ever been on a psychedelic. I've never been on psychedelics, so I can't tell you exactly, but I know when I started meditating, like I said, I used to get a lot of sleep paralysis. So and during these sleep paralysis episodes, I would sometimes hear things, and it kind of sounds sometimes like you're tapping into like a frequency, like a radio station, like you're hearing. Sometimes I could hear music, sometimes I could hear whispering. But when I started really meditating, and I was really into Esther Hicks. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, right? Mm-hmm. Then I started really, like you said, I suffered from anxiety and I wanted to quiet my mind, and I started doing this, and that's when I started to be able to actually hear something similar to like what you said. Like they actually asked me, like, do you want us to bring you here, or to take you here? And it freaked me out, because I was like, here where? And I was like, no, because but I was like very like scared at that moment, because that was like the first time I had like interpreted what was being said. So for me, that's kind of like trance. So sometimes people might hear what you're saying and they're like, what? But that's kind of what it feels like. It's like as if you were going in and out. So now that we have discussed how you found Jesus and how you found the Gnostic text, I'm sure most people understand what it is, but just to brief. So the Gnostic texts imply that obviously that the one and true Almighty God is Abba Father, but that this reality has been created by a demiurge. It's like a demiurge, a lesser god, who is jealous and who represents the God that you read about in the Old Testament. But he is not exactly the one that is enlightened as in the Almighty God. So after you found these Gnostic texts and you started to really identify with what you also saw in your vision related to, I guess, this being like a matrix, really, right? How did that change the way you started to relate to people? Because, for example, as I started learning more about the matrix, honestly, I already was facing a lot of spiritual warfare, because that's what I'm going to call it. And I started separating from a lot of people. So I've been in my isolation period for a while now. But like now it's even more, like you said, after seeing the synchronicities, and I've gotten better at recognizing, let's say, NPCs and all of this, I don't want to intermingle too much with people unless I really feel like, I test them out. I always say test their spirit, kind of test them out and see what they're all about. Because unfortunately, when you, like I said, begin to know so much, it's as if you send out like a radar in the matrix, and then you start to be targeted, and they kind of send people in your direction to create drama and distraction. So how did you start relating to people? Because now you believe in a different ideology, not completely different, but different from your culture. So now your conversations are going to be different, I imagine, with family, with friends. And how did that all evolve?
So I have to say that when I started diving deep into the Gnostic text, this is why I do take it all with a grain of salt, because I saw how it influenced my life, and it wasn't all positive. Like, I started to really almost all of a sudden be more afraid, if anything. Like, I never had this fear of demons. Anytime I did psychedelics, I didn't have this fear that I was going to get possessed. Like, I didn't have all that super deep like conditioning of like the devil's out to get you. Like I knew that was a part of Christian theology, but I, for some whatever reason, never really felt super afraid of the devil. I didn't have dream like I had cousins growing up. Oh, I had dreamt that the devil was pulling me down. Like I didn't have that so much for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't judge people who have. Like I don't know if it's, I don't deny people's experience, but for me personally, demonic stuff, devil, like all that stuff never really got to me. Never really like, of course I questioned it a lot and I wanted to understand like why, what is it, what's going on? Like, is evil real? Like what's, and the Gnostic stuff, honestly, for the first time I did start feeling like paranoid, like about the archons, which are, are demons, and like how, and I started, I was like reading it late into the night and I would get kind of like these weird, like, ugh, like, kind of freaky feelings because I'm like, wow, even just the idea that all of a sudden, the way that they look at reincarnation is not like how Dolores Cannon even speaks about it. I mean, I started questioning if my past life regression stuff was all a lie because Dolores talks about people who go on the spirit side and they see a light, like for the near death experiences, right? And they see a light and that light convinces them to go back because they still have more work to do. They still have more karma to clear out. Or like when you die, you pick a new lifetime and you have this spirit team that helps you curate this amazing life. And I'm like, the Gnostics are pretty much saying that that is the archons in disguise, like trying to disguise as a light and convincing you to come back. And that scared me probably more than anything. Like the idea that if I died, I would be tricked into coming back and who knows how long till you, and then you forget everything and you have to start over. And that also put a lot of fear into me. And honestly, how I related to the world was weird because like shortly after looking into all of it, my dad's best friend had a son with muscle dystrophy and autism like since he was born, and he died that like shortly after. He died after, I think he was like 19. He made it quite a bit past his life expectancy, but he eventually passed. And I was at the funeral and seeing my dad's best friend, who's kind of like an uncle, like just watching him grieve his wife, and just it was so hard to sit there and to think about the fact that he could just be dying and moving on and starting over and having to come back here. And all of a sudden, I just didn't have any peace about people dying anymore. It used to be that, oh, past lives is this beautiful thing because you get this chance to come back and make all your wrongs right. You get to redo everything. That's so amazing. God is like willing to give us many chances to, but now I'm like, I don't know if that's real at all. I don't know, because Jesus's message, especially in the Course in Miracles, is unconditional love and forgiveness. And that applies to yourself. That applies to the fact that there is only one will and it's God. So ultimately, anything you perceive as a mistake is just the ego basically overpowering you. Like nothing, he describes forgiveness as really, it's kind of like what people might call bypassing, but it's sort of like there is nothing to forgive. That's how he described his own crucifixion. He said, he corrected it. He's like, they said I, went after Judas or was angry at Judas for betraying me. But he's like, how could I do that if I don't believe in betrayal in the first place? How could I do that if I don't believe in, that he did anything wrong in the first place? And that's kind of how the Gnostics actually paint Judas, is that he played an important role, something that Jesus was meant to put, right? So if you really think about that on that level, that we're all just kind of playing out certain characters and certain roles. I like to think of it as like maybe when we all die, we kind of get to the red carpet and it's all just actors. Oh, you were the villain and you were the good guy. And we're all just standing there, real people, real souls, recognizing who we really are, the actors underlying the characters, right? And so I had a lot of questions that I was battling through, and I'm still not fully there. The thing that I had to recognize was like, okay, some of this is really dark and it's putting me in a fear-based place, and I don't like that. So I took a step back and I actually paused on the Gnostic stuff. And I had to recognize that maybe not all of this is accurate, maybe not all of this is true, and to really take what like actually made sense to me. So a lot of it is like, okay, this reality is not created by God. That I feel is true. Whether it is an evil God, like I don't know. Whether we miscreated it, sometimes I wonder, this is my personal theory, I'm going to share it with you because it's not fully developed and I don't talk about it a lot, but sometimes I'm like, what if we are the demiurge? What if we are the miscreation that Sophia miscreated, and the demiurge fell into ignorance and it split into all these fractal pieces, And we have so much shame and guilt, and we have this ego in our mind that like convinces us that we're like no good nothings, and and all these stories is how the demiurge is kind of just trying to come back to its wholeness. And maybe there is nothing going after us at all. Maybe it's us. Like maybe it's just this split in our mind, and Jesus is coming back to basically redeem us. Like, no, God still views you as a divine child of God. Like we're gonna adopt you. Like you're gonna become adopted into, even though you might, maybe we weren't created how we were supposed to be. I don't know, right? It's like all these cosmologies are probably symbolic in the first place. Like we really don't know, like from this level of awareness, how it all played out and how it all came to be. But a part of me does not I do not like to live in victim mentality. And that's what I find in a lot of these theories is, oh, there's something out to get me. And I do not like that, honestly, because really the thing that's out to get you is your ego, is in your own mind, and it's not even doing it out of malevolent intent. It's just this conditioning, right? It's just like how it was programmed, and it's, so that's kind of where I get back to, always this core of like, I'm not a victim, but there is some level that I need to get to. There is something that I need to awaken to, that I need to remember in order to see past it. And I think we're all on our path to do that. So going back to your question, how I related to people was very, I felt very estranged for a while, felt very isolated. I probably never felt more isolated on my spiritual journey than when I discovered Gnosticism. Luckily, there was a lot of people talking about it on YouTube, like a lot of historians. There wasn't a lot of like influencers talking about it yet, but a lot of people on YouTube like were talking about it. Elaine Pagels, and like there's Gnostic Informant, like all these groups. And so I really like delved deep into like the research aspect of it. And yeah, it really, again, it filled certain gaps, but also created more holes. And so it's not like a perfect one line like story. And I personally can't say that I feel like I've been targeted. I don't like, I don't know if I'm just lucky. I don't know if I don't know, I don't want to say, like, I don't deny that that's a possibility. But I can't say that I've been targeted. There maybe were times in my life where I had like different people that I maybe felt like had karmic like contracts with, or experiences, particularly when I was deep in like psychedelics. I had a few relationships, like friendship and like a person I was dating, that felt like they were kind of leeching on my energy, that felt like they didn't have the best intentions. Maybe that was some sort of spiritual attack. I don't know. But again, I don't love to be like in this victim, like the world is out to get me. I like to feel empowered. I like to feel like God is on my side. I am protected. But that's not to say that there can't be freaky things that happen, like when a couple months ago, I actually did a spiritual fast. It was my first time fasting. I basically just ate a very pure diet, wasn't really on social media much. Just like all the typical things, just kind of decreasing my dopamine intake and meditating a lot. And I started to have interesting things happening in my meditations, which I don't usually have. My meditations are not fun. They're like, shut up, like it's just like, shut up, trying to shut the ego up. That's it. That's all my meditations have ever been. But all of a sudden I started feeling like energy, like circulating. And mind you, I have been working on my chakras for a few years now. And I'm aware of Kundalini awakening as something that's a thing. But when I first heard about Kundalini, like obviously I'd also heard that it could be dangerous if you awaken it too fast, like your body cannot be ready. So I was like, you know what? That seems a little sketchy. I'm gonna not really like focus on that. I'm gonna just work on my chakras. If Kundalini happens, that's great. If not, then that's fine. That's not my like main goal. My goal, like I knew God put on my heart that I needed to work on my energy centers. And so this is now my 4th year working on my energy centers. And I felt this call to do a fast. And I was like, this is weird. Like God just put it on my heart. And I was like, maybe something's gonna happen. Like maybe I am being called to sort of like, go through some sort of awakening. Something's gonna, I don't know, but I had no expectations. And I started feeling like energy pulsating in my third eye. I started feeling like these, different motions. I started feeling my body kind of swaying back and forth. And then it was one meditation. I think it was like during the full moon, because I fasted for like 20 days. So it was like almost a month, and I I had this experience where like the energy was circulating, and I started focusing on my breath, and I started having it like kind of run up and down my chakra system. And I started feeling like my heart, like there was this light like opening up in my heart, and I could see my heart. It was just like this green gemstone, like kind of like how you think of like green is like the color of the heart chakra. And so I just saw it as like this like beautiful stone, and like white light was coming out of it. And all of a sudden, like it was very beautiful. And I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. And I'm trying to keep my rational mind from like thinking about it and like pulling myself out. I'm just trying to experience it. I'd had a few like little moments where I caught myself like rationalizing. I'm like, okay, I'm here, I'm here. And all of a sudden, I felt this little like, I saw in my mind's eye this little black entity that was like 2D, and it was like two-dimensional, and it kind of came over my head, like, and it kind of like peeked down on me and was like, like, what are you doing, and I was just like, whoa, what was that? And I felt like the only time I'd seen something like that was actually when I did DMT. You can sometimes see like weird little beings existing. They're quick, they move fast, but they were two-dimensional and flat. And it reminded me of, if you've ever watched Hercules, the little ladies on the jar, like how they're like these little black figures, like, and they're all flat and they're like dancing on the jars, right? That's kind of what I saw. And I was a little like, whoa, what was that? And that immediately put me into like fear, where I was like, oh my God, like, is this demonic? Is what I'm doing wrong? Like, I started feeling like, at first I was feeling like maybe this was Kundalini, but then all of a sudden this little entity kind of freaked me out. My heart started to pound like right around that time. It was either before or after I saw the little being, but my heart was already starting to kind of like pound, and it started pounding so fast that I felt like, whoa, like I'm about to like have a heart attack or something. Like, it was intense. Like, I'd never, and it wasn't like fear pounding. It was just like, it was just happening. I wasn't even that afraid, but a part of me was like, part of me was keeping cool. Like, I've had experiences with psychedelics where you kind of, you're afraid, you're kind of panicking, and you got to keep chill. You got to just like go with the wave and like get through it. And you always get to the other side. But a part of me was like, okay, God, this was really cool. I felt something. I definitely experienced something, but like, I'm not quite ready yet. And I pulled myself out. I opened my eyes. I got out of the meditation. And I honestly broke into tears after that, because I was like so happy that I'd experienced what I knew was possible. And I know there's more possible, but it was for the first time I'd experienced something spiritual like that in my meditation. But the little being did freak me out. And it did make me wonder, like, is this whole Gnostic thing real? Are there little archons and little things, little entities that are like, I mean, it didn't like, it was black and two-dimensional and like not really like super clear what it was, but whether it was malevolent, I don't know. It felt like it was curious and looking in on me and was like, oh, what is she up to? Like, is she onto something here? Like, oh, she's like getting close to something. That's what it felt like. But whether that was an attack, I don't know. It just kind of freaked me out. And then from that point on, the rest of my meditations, I actually just like made sure to kind of create like a white pyramid of light, like just kind of visualize protection over me, and nothing else happened like that. And I still continue to have like beautiful little energetic experiences. I wouldn't say I quite, reached Kundalini awakening or anything like that. And I'm not quite, obsessed with that right now. I'm sort of just like back to my normal day to day, but that was definitely an interesting experience. So yeah, that was kind of the closest thing that I would say I had, where I felt like I was face to face. But it was like a second, it was just like literally peeked in and peeked out, and then it left me with this like this Christian conditioning of like, oh my God, this must be evil, something is wrong, maybe I've been deceived. All those like underlying questions come up, and then I kind of worked through it, and at the end of it I felt so much joy that I was like, no, like that's not it. So yeah, that's kind of my little weird happening.
I mean, it's fantastic that you like this experience that you mentioned was basically similar to what I had, but like I had it during sleep paralysis, and I didn't actually see the creature, but I knew it was something that it didn't sound feminine or masculine. I think honestly, if you ever read Irish folklore and they talk about imps, that's what I think they are.
No.
They're like imps or something. Yeah, they're just little imps that just run around, which technically most people would say they are demonic, but they are like lesser demons. They're mischievous. But
Yeah, that's kind of the energy I got. Mischievous, exactly. Yeah.
they come before sometimes other entities that follow them. And I even had a guest who came to speak about like shadow people and all that. I've never actually seen the entities that have spoken to me during meditation, but that's very interesting you said that. And the whole thing about the chakras and the Kundalini, of course, now this is something that I like to really talk about as a Christian, because I mean, all of us have energy centers in our body. And although I think sometimes the prejudice comes from the fact that when people are introduced to these ideas, especially like you're using the word chakra. So they're going to automatically say, okay, well, that's from Eastern religion. That's not related to this. But in Christianity, we have similar terms for the same thing. And I tell the story, or I wrote it in my blog, that there was one time, I think this was actually in January, January, February. I was praying. I wasn't meditating in that moment, but sometimes I do 3 a.m. prayers, and I'm like going in and out, and I do fast a lot. And it's great that you mentioned that, because fasting is, usually they say fasting with prayer, but fasting in general makes your spirit body like light. So it makes you more susceptible to enter into a complete trance and all of these kind of things. So I was doing a 3 a.m. prayer, and I felt from my root chakra, something like burning, like not painful, but like hot. And it started going up. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I've been sitting in this position too long. But then it didn't really hurt. But then I felt it come back again, like, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the chakra. That's that thing that they talk about, the Kundalini. And I was like, wow, because it never happened to me before, as much meditation I had done in the past. So I'm really glad for you that you experienced these things, because, I feel like a lot of people really want to have these experiences. And these are the kind of experiences that make you believe more in spirituality and in other possibilities of other realms. And
they're like confirmational.
Yeah. And it's sad, because maybe some people don't get to have these experiences, so they just have to kind of believe. And I think that's where sometimes it's hard for people. But the fact that you've had these experiences, it's even more confirming that something exists. Another thing you said before, and I love the point that you made with Jesus and Judas, right? Because there, I do believe that sin, because you even did a video about it, like sin is something that, unless you really are doing something like wicked that a lot of times we do things in ignorance. And in the sense of Judas, like Jesus already knew what he was going to do. And Judas acted in his nature. The devil acts in his nature. People who, certain NPCs, they act in their nature. And there's this idea that nothing's inherently per se, I use the word evil for people to understand, but nothing is necessarily completely evil because everyone's acting in their nature. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that. And it's the concept of also, when we do certain things or we're sinning, we're kind of, I feel, we're learning along the way a lot of times. Like we don't, everybody's in this experience, and we're learning as we go along, as we have certain things happen to us. It all depends on the choices that we make and all of this, which path we choose. And I mean, yeah, some people can say, well, that's the wrong route, but in the end, it all contributes to our expansion and our spiritual growth, whether or not. So can you talk a little bit also about like sin and how people view it? For example, in the Christian church, of course, repentance is important, but it's something that also should be coming from you, I feel, also, not necessarily like that you should feel like someone else has to, forgive you except God. But can you tell us a little bit more about your idea of sin, especially now knowing more about the Gnostic teachings?
So Gnostics like have a similar view to A Course in Miracles, which is like where I really, again, like resonated with it, because this book is what I feel like really saved me and pulled me out of like depression. And really the belief that it instilled in me is that I am a divine child of God, that I am holy, that I am worthy, that I am unbroken, like I am perfect, right? And because the soul in me was created by God. That is divine, right? That's not part of this material reality. That's not part of the illusion. And therefore, nothing that it can do can taint it or damage it or anything. And sin is ultimately not real. Sin is like, the way that A Course in Miracles paints it is, it's just, I mean, it's a misunderstanding. Like they don't, the terminology that I think when we look at like the Greek word, right, misses the mark. Like, sure, we can make mistakes, but there's always correction for those mistakes. There's like, there's always the opportunity to correct that. That's kind of what, the Easterns view as karma, right? You'll always have an opportunity to kind of correct and amend. But Jesus, the way I love Jesus also kind of pieces it together is he says, forgiving yourself. Like, to me, I feel like if we get fixated on karma and always needing to like amend for mistakes and things like that, we're never gonna like get out of the cycle, because you're always gonna unintentionally hurt somebody, do something, right? That like we do make mistakes in this illusion, in this reality, but nothing that happens in this reality is ultimately real, right? It's like think of your whole life before the Matrix. When you plug out, none of that happened. It's like a bad dream. Do you worry about what you do in your dreams? I mean, sometimes it can be a little unnerving, but you move on with your day and you forget, right? You forget what happens. I can't remember what I dreamt this morning. That's how unplugging out of the Matrix ultimately will feel like, at least according to the Course. It says, I love this line. It says in the Bible, it says that a deep sleep fell upon Adam, and nowhere does it say that he ever woke up. We're all still asleep. We're all still a part of the dream, right? The Course talks about it more like a dream than a matrix. It doesn't use those words, but that's kind of, so sin, the way that Christianity portrays it, they might not, if you call it out, they'll be like, oh no, it's not like this and all that. But really, like, the message you receive as a Christian is that you're a sinner by nature. It's what you're going to do. You're going to basically make mistakes constantly. And the way they describe sin, it's like rebellion against God, right? Because that's the original sin, is the rebellion against God. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because that's where the Course and Gnosticism kind of conflict. The Course does describe a fall, and it wasn't so much as like a rebellion, but it was just this like ignorance, or this like kind of like this desire to like know what life outside of God would be like, and that's impossible. So then maybe we created this like illusion of like what the feeling of separation from God would feel like, even though it's not real. You can never ultimately be separate from God, but you can kind of have this like little video game experience of what that would be like. And it sucks, right? Like, that's kind of the realization we come to. And maybe that is, like when I ran away from home at 17, I was in my rebellion. I was like, I want to be free. I need to figure things out for myself. When I moved back, there is this realization of, wow, like, it's so nice to feel safe. It's so nice to know where I'm going to be sleeping tonight. It's so nice to have my mom occasionally do my laundry for me, or to have a meal that's cooked for me that I don't have to like, right? Like, you get this like appreciation for what it's like to be back home, because you experience the contrast. And maybe that's what this all is contrast. It's, I'm here to experience what it would be like to be separate from God, to not be in that beautiful union, that just that presence, to feel the contrast of that, so that when I come back, it'll just be that much more sweet. It'll be that much more appreciated. So sin, I mean, the Gnostics view the Garden of Eden a completely different way than what Christianity painted. They paint it as Adam and Eve rebelled. She wanted to become like God, so she ate the fruit, and then God cast them both out. The Gnostics viewed them to be asleep, ignorant of their true divine nature, and that Jesus actually came in the garden, or like the Logos, Christ. There's different theories like of how it all played out, but something came to try to awaken Adam and Eve to eat that fruit, to wake up to the fact that none of this is real, to wake up to the fact that this isn't God at all, right? Because they were so asleep, they were so unconscious. There's even theories that I like to pull from with like Zechariah Sitchin talks about like the Anunnaki, or like the Enuma Elish. There's a guy named Billy Carson. He talks about it a lot, about how there's also theories that they're extraterrestrials. So maybe it's not spiritual, maybe it's extraterrestrial, where these beings came and they genetically modified Adam and Eve as like these humanoids. They took the beings on Earth and kind of created them to be sort of like a slave race, right? And then the story of the Garden of Eden is when they kind of escaped out of that and like wanted to awaken. There was supposedly a positive, like a benevolent Anunnaki who came, who wanted to give them like understanding, and so that they could whatever, and the other Anunnaki punish them, and so there's all kinds of theories. There's all kinds. It's fascinating where this story comes from, because almost all these cultures just pull from it, this Adam and Eve, and the apple, and the fruit and the forbidden. So I don't know. Sin is a conflicting one. Like, I do believe ultimately there's nothing that we can do to separate ourselves from God at the end of the day. Even like what you're saying, like personally, I don't very much, I try not to see any separation between me and my brother, like me and any other human being. Whether they're asleep is irrelevant. Like if they're still asleep, that's not, and they're going to act differently if they're asleep, right? Like you're saying, their nature, but their nature is temporary because it comes from ignorance, just like the Gnostics say, agnoia, the ignorance. So whatever, even if they're like intentionally doing something, sometimes we do things like I have been called to make a mistake, right? I don't know if you've ever had this like push from God to go do something, and then you're like, oh, fuck, that backfired. But like, for whatever reason, it still all worked out in the end, right? Like it's still all kind of, maybe that mistake was a divine mistake that you were meant to make that would then lead to a series of events, And really what I like learned this somewhere, I forget where, but I started doing this prayer every morning where I give my day to God and I say, God, thank you for this day. I ask you to show me, what would you have me do and not do? Think and not think, see and not see, hear and not hear, feel and not feel. I give up every sense, every action, everything that I can possibly do. I give it to you. I surrender to you. Do with it as you will. Use your will to align my life. And whether a positive or negative thing happens that day is irrelevant because it's God's will. I surrendered my day, my life, everything to him. So that's how I saw it. So yeah, like there would be things that I would do and I'd be like, fuck, like that sucked. And then I'd remember, hey, I prayed to God today and I gave my day to him. So if that happened today, then ultimately this must be part of his will, whether or not I understand it, right? And that's how I get out of the whole belief of sin in the first place, because really it's like anything I do, I have surrendered to God's will. I've aligned my will with his, because I realize that there really is only one will, and that is God's, right? And so if someone's still acting out of their ego, that's because they're still on the journey of awakening, right? And they're still just getting to that place of waking up, basically. So yeah, I don't know if that answers it, because it's a complex topic, but I did love that interpretation that I recently did of all the Greek words. If you want me to kind of explain that real quick, basically how in Greek, if you look at the word for sin, it means to miss the mark, right? I forget the Greek word itself. It says to miss the mark. Then Jesus said, I have come to bring sinners to repentance. So obviously repentance is part of the key to getting out of sinning. And repentance is metanoia, which means to change your mind or direction. So in order to stop missing the mark, to stop making those mistakes, you need to change your mind, your directions. To me, that's changing your beliefs, right? And that's where the Gnostics come in with agnoia. They spoke of the reason we sin is we're acting out of ignorance, out of an unawareness that we have a divine spark within us, that we are children of God, part of the divine, inherently holy and perfect, right? And so in order to basically stop sinning, which Jesus did say we can, he said, go and sin no more, or stop sinning lest, worse things happen to you, like consequences, natural consequences, not from God, just, things that happen. Like, he did say we can sin. And he also said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And the word for perfect there is completion, it's wholeness, it's maturity, right? So in order to stop sinning or missing the mark, we need to repent, which is to change our mind, to change our beliefs. The beliefs we need to change is the ignorance that we're in, that we are separate from God. We need to recognize that we are one with God. We have that divine spark within us that is holy and true. And when we do that, we recognize our perfection, our wholeness, our completion. That's when we reach that wholeness with God. And so it's not about, having a stain on your heart or on your soul. It's not about being born a sinner. It's simply the recognition. We are born into a state where we're asleep. We're asleep for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't know how the sleep came upon us, but we are asleep. And the whole point of it all is to awaken and then to help others wake up too. That's really like my purpose. If anybody asks me what my purpose is, that's it. It's to wake up and then to help others wake up too. It's as simple
And
as that.
that's a big mission, and that's really important as well. And I love the way you explained the concept of sin, because I do feel like, that is inherently what it is. It's the idea, or when Jesus says sin no more, it's about changing your mindset. I'll give you a quick example, because I think it's also different related to everyone's experience. So this is why I also like to hear how your spiritual awakening happened versus how mine happened, how this person happens, because I think they're all different, but they're all going in the same direction. And I think I also believe that it's how you look at it. And you also, like you said, you never looked at things from a fear-based perspective. And I think with me, I did have a lot of pent up fear from things I'd heard growing up. So I did look at, certain things with demons. I had that already in my mind. It was part of my culture. It was, always spoken about. So I already had those things in there. And, when certain things started happening to me, I still kind of refer to it like that. Like, it's a spiritual warfare. It's a warfare. I'm fighting. And I still kind of have that view. I'm growing, but like you said, we're all on this journey, taking our own time. It's not exactly linear. And, the thing is, I'll give you the example of my idea of sin and how I'm going to explain, like, I would say, for example, take sexual sin, which is very big in Christianity. And the concept of, like you said, like if you're having premarital affairs with other people, depending how you interpret it, if you interpret it from this Gnostic perspective, right? You could say that a lot of people today, when they're with other people, sometimes we don't look at ourselves as extensions of God. We don't look at ourselves as temples of God. And unfortunately, we kind of just maybe throw ourselves or go with the people who we shouldn't, who are going to drain us energetically, narcissists, all sorts of people. And I'm not even talking about like sexually transmitted disease. I'm talking about like spiritually transmitted diseases, because like I do believe that that's an energy exchange depending on who you're with, or it's a draining. And we do this out of ignorance because we are following trends. We really don't. Sometimes we do it because we, whatever emotion is going on, sometimes in our minds, our self-worth, we feel sometimes it depends, whatever's going on. Sometimes we have a habit of going into these kind of lifestyles that are, that take away from the fact that we are extensions of God, and we do it out of ignorance. And if we were to, like you said, repent and actually change our concept of who we are and try to do better, that in a sense is, I guess you would say like you're actually, how would you say, like repenting? Would it be like repentance? I guess so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're not asking, a priest to forgive.
It's not about, groveling and begging for forgiveness and feeling guilt and shame. It's about a literal change in mind. So if you can recognize, oh, what I was doing was out of ignorance, and I'm no longer, because it's mind and direction. So it's your thinking and your actions. So, oh, I'm no longer going to go and do that. After having that recognition, then yeah, you have repented and you are no longer a sinner, right? By according to those terms. And I think it's interesting that you bring that up. I'd love to share a short story about my experience with sexual, because I have some lessons, if there's any girls watching this, of my own experiences, because I grew up, like I said, where I had abuse in my household. I didn't have the best relationship with my father and had a lot of hate. I didn't have any brothers. I didn't have a lot of men around me in general in my family that made me feel safe, loved, and protected. So my standards were pretty low. I also experienced weight gain in my young teens where I felt very insecure in my body. So I, again, had low self-worth, let's just say. I was very insecure. So when I started dating my boyfriend, the way I lost my virginity and all that was, not ideal, but nonetheless, at least he was my boyfriend and we did stay together for a while. But he had sex with other girls, and that created a lot of insecurity in me and jealousy in me. And I used to, like go on his phone at night and like obsess about these other girls. And I was kind of all crazy, and then we broke up. I found out that he was like kind of occasionally, I don't know if he actually did anything with girls, but there were like conversations in the past that he was like having with other girls. I had suspicions that he might have cheated on me. Anyways, we had a whole toxic relationship in the first place. So when we broke up, I went on kind of, like I said, I met those older guys, those Romanian people, and they were wild. They were party guys. I mean, sex was completely normal. Like I'm telling you. And honestly, like I grew up watching Friends. I grew up watching these shows where it's like, oh, being an adult, this is totally normal to just sleep around, right? And so I was out of like, I really think that who you surround yourself with will play a role on whether you stay a virgin till marriage or whether you go and have sex. Because if you're around people who think it's completely normal, that becomes a part of your culture. And then you think it's normal too. And that's who I was around. Had I been around goody Christians who were like all waiting till marriage, that probably would have been more the path I would have went down too. But nonetheless, like obviously I made my own choices and I'm okay with them. And so I went through a phase of just kind of being reckless with sex. And towards the end, like I said, that one relationship that I felt like the soul energy vampire, that's where I really felt the consequences of having sex too soon. And I felt like there was this weird attachment and something was very energetically going on. That's all. But that he is the reason that I took DMT and I had that experience with God. So ultimately, do I regret that? No, because if I hadn't met that guy and hadn't had that experience, I might not have had that experience, right? And so I don't say I regret any of it, but I definitely felt the consequence of doing so. And I actually met my husband at the same time I was dating this guy. And my husband was trying to pursue me, but I was kind of stuck. I was caught up on this dude for whatever reason. I was just like trapped. I felt like I would try to end it and I would like always get like sucked back in somehow. And my husband was just an amazing man. He was my mechanic. He was fixing my car. So we were just kind of friendly, but he was a good guy. And so long story short, I ended up breaking up with this guy. And over time, I did some work on myself. I did some reflecting and I started really thinking about like what was important to me. I took a break from sex altogether. I even stopped masturbating. Like I had addictions to porn growing up. I had addictions to masturbation. Growing up in a household with abuse, before I could even get my hands on drugs, I found other ways to get dopamine, whether it was food, whether it was, again, these other things. So I didn't have drugs and alcohol yet, but I had other ways to give me a feeling of feeling better when I'm depressed and living in this toxic environment. And so I broke up, I did some reflection and I realized that like, wow, like my husband like checks all these boxes. That guy, Ryan, he checks all these boxes of like what I really think is important in a marriage and in a relationship. And so long story short, we start dating, we get together, and he's older than me by 9 years, which is normal. I've dated a guy, like the guy I was dating before was also like 8 years. Like I was always dating guys older than my age. And but it's funny because like he was 16 when I was 6 and he lost his virginity at 16. Now, if this is the man I meant to be with and I did wait to and I was a virgin and I did the righteous path and I saved myself for marriage and I married him, who I feel like is my soulmate that God really set aside for me, I would be so distraught to be a virgin and marry a man who'd been having sex since he was 16, right? It's like I needed to have my own past in order to even be able to be equally yoked, right? In that sense, like because I could not handle being married to an older man who had had years of sexual experience and I was just this little virgin girl. Like seeing that in my first relationship with my boyfriend and how much that was just like so hard for me, that kind of helped me realize like, okay, like, yeah, I had a little more compassion on myself. And to be fair, when we did start having sex, it was like it felt like the first time. It really was like, oh, this is what it was always about. And that's where I did recognize, wow, I wish I hadn't done it that way. I wish it was different. Although those mistakes were necessary, I do see the consequences of having done it that way. Now, my husband and I, we lived together pretty much from getting together. We got together during COVID. The world was at a weird place. Like we lived an hour away. So I just started like living with him and basically we ended up starting a business together. We started doing all these things together. Like we built a whole life before we actually got married. But at a certain point, like I was like, all right, like we need to get married. And it was very hard for him to put aside the money to like get the ring, for the wedding, things like that. That's when I started to recognize, like, although we wanted to get married, we had all the perks of already being married. We were living together. We did whatever we wanted, right? We were pretty much married. We just not by law. And that's when I realized, oh, this is another reason why people like don't live together until they get married, because otherwise there isn't as much motivation. He could have saved the money for the ring, but there was always something more important. And again, like we already have all the comforts of being married, so it's not like you really have all that much to look forward to other just this wedding day and just signing this paper, right? So that's where I was like, okay, yeah, if I was to tell a young girl, like, should you live together before getting married? I would honestly say no, because there were also times where, we did have fights and we thought about breaking up, but like we have dogs together and we live together and we like share all our things. We own a business together. I'm like, man, if he wasn't the man that was right for me, and if we did actually have to break up, it would be so difficult because of all this attachment, this whole life we had co-created, but we had no like legal structure to like protect me. Like, right? If like we got divorced, would I like lose my claim to this business? Would I, whatever? And so I was like, okay, yeah, like I see why there are cultural norms. Wait till marriage to have sex, don't live together until you're married, things like that. I totally get it. Do I think those things are necessarily a sin? No, I think that I think like adultery, like cheating, breaking the covenant of marriage, that could be more closer to like a more Like even in the Gnostic text, in the Gospel of Mary, Jesus said something like, he said something like, there is no such thing as sin, but there are things of the nature like adultery that are of that nature. Like what you would consider sin, like adultery, that's breaking a commandment, right? There are laws, but fornication is frowned upon, not necessarily a sin, right? That even in the Bible, like it's really just like not recommended from what I understand. Adultery is not the same as fornication, like that they're not, the same thing. So that's just like my thing is like, if you have a sexual past, I don't think you need to live in guilt and shame about it. But of course, repenting, recognizing your mistakes, and seeing that there are reasons. That's actually why I went, before the Gnostic stuff, I went through a period where I was really in that trad movement, the traditional lifestyle of, do I want to be a mom? Do I want to stay at home? Do we want to have that traditional family unit? And I started looking into traditional Christianity and kind of almost, I started going back to church again. And this was kind of before, during that Gnostic time, but it was really hard, honestly, to go to church. But I tried it out and I was kind of going, and like you're saying with your children, like I probably will let my children go to church too. Like I probably would go if I had kids right now, we'd probably be a part of church community as well, because I know how important community can be, and community that has God at the forefront. And that's beautiful. Even if there are doctrine and, things like that, that I don't agree with, I think that's important. And so when I was doing that, I was going through like traditionality. I'm like, okay, I recognize all these aspects of myself where I was rebelling. I was a rebel, right? I rebelled against sex before marriage. I rebelled against smoking. I rebelled, all these things that I rebelled against my dad, mainly my parents, because I was hurt and I wanted to hurt them. And I realized I was only hurting myself, right? Like really, I was hurting myself by not listening to all of their suggestions and their advice. And I recognize that there are reasons that we have these traditional norms, these things put into place, and that you really got to look at them from a healed perspective, not a wounded, like, I want to, go out and do whatever I want. Like, when you grow up, you have to get to a place where you reflect, like, where have I been rebelling in my life? Where am I still acting from a wounded state rather than being a mature, whole human, and realizing, like, oh, even something as simple as like tattoos. I have no judgment against anyone who has tattoos. I have a sleeve myself. And my culture is very against tattoos, more than most Christian people in like America. Slavic people very much see it as a sin. And I, at 17, was a smoker. I was whatever. I didn't care. I wanted to get a tattoo. This was my symbol of rebellion. This is how I hurt my parents the most, probably. Just this permanent mark that my entire culture could see and judge them for, right? It was like I wanted to break all of their ego. I wanted to break all of their, like, that was me, right? That was where my mindset was. Mind you, when my mom saw and was breaking down crying, I wanted to crawl into a hole and die, and I regretted ever being born. Honestly, I just hurt her so much. But nonetheless, it was an important lesson. Again, I made a mistake, even hurting others. But honestly, they grew a lot from this experience, and they learned to accept me as I am. And they kind of had to get over a lot of the judgments of other people because of that. So really, like, being a Scorpio child, I came to catalyze them. I came to, trigger them and heal them in a lot of ways. And but the thing is, later on, as I started getting crunchy and more holistic and healthy, I learned that tattoos have a lot of heavy metals in them, and that they live inside of your body permanently. And that heavy metals are actually a cause for autism in children. And women can pass a lot of the toxins and a lot of the metals in their body to their baby through the placenta when they're, carrying their child. And then we see a lot of children with autism. I'm not saying they're the only cause for autism, of course. I'm not saying, like, there are many, many causes. And a lot of it is environmental. It's all the toxins and pollutions in our food, in our diet, in our lifestyle. But the temple that you have, you're putting this toxic ink into it, and that gets passed to your baby. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, here I was rebelling against my culture. And there was some validity to this, right? There was some toxin in this stuff that, like, but the thing is, it wasn't explained to me in that way. And that's where a lot of rebellion stems from. They say, it's a sin, don't do it. Why? No explanation. Had somebody broken that down to me, maybe I would have listened, maybe not. I was smoking cigarettes. I knew that was bad for me. So I was like, fuck it, I didn't even think I wanted kids at 17. So, like, I probably still would have gotten this tattoo. But had I been healed, maybe I would have made other choices. Do I like, I wish I didn't have it. Do I regret it? Not exactly. But like, sometimes I'm like, man, like, I would have preferred not to have it. I don't hate what it is, but it's just like, knowing these things definitely makes you more aware. And so I think it's really important for people to reflect on where they were rebelling, giving grace to themselves, accepting, like, it's not a sin. Mistakes are made for reasons. Like, ultimately, it led me to all these lessons. And maybe by me getting this tattoo, sharing it here online, will stop other girls from going and getting it. So ultimately, it's serving in some way, right? That's kind of where I have gotten to with this. But sorry, I didn't mean to get on a whole trajectory there, but just in case anyone was listening that needed some, insight from the other side, especially young girls, any like, girls in that stage of life, that could definitely resonate.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it is what it is. And at the end, it all serves a purpose. And one thing I was going to say, well, to retract. So yeah, the whole like concept, like I said, with with fornication in comparison, like you said, to adultery, like I think it's related to that whole spiritual energetic thing, that's like the meaning I feel like in scripture when they talk about it being something that you shouldn't be doing. And also from a traditional perspective, obviously culturally, if young girls are in cultures and they do this, they have a chance of not getting married, a lot of things like that. That's really why I think also it was heavily stressed from the beginning. But it was something that from the beginning of time, I think a lot of people have done, because people are people. And a lot of a lot of times, if you go through history, people didn't have the money to get married, especially if you research like in the 1800s and certain time periods. That was something that rich people did, and a lot of couples just kind of were together. So the institution of marriage was developed to cover that a little bit. But yeah, I think from the spiritual perspective, it's just something I wouldn't do, not to give license to any kind of energetic attachments, or like you said, soul ties that could form if you're with someone who isn't equally yoked for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
the thing. And the other thing I wanted to say, about the tattoos. So I have a couple. I'm from that generation, like, I have the butterfly on my lower back. So I got tattoos, and I have the Ankh on this one, and but what they say about tattoos is, besides the inks and all of this, obviously, is the symbolism. So I was told I have both that I got, like, or the last three that I've got have been religious. So like I've gotten a cross and all of this. But yeah, most Christians, especially like evangelicals, might tell you like, no, that's the mark. I've heard this from people.
Yeah.
And I think what's more important, especially if you do get a tattoo, if you don't want to get a tattoo, all right. But if you do, I always say you got to be careful about who's giving you the tattoo. And I really feel like the energy of the person, because you shed blood when you get a tattoo. There's
like a ritual.
Energy.
Yeah.
You have to know who you're allowing to tattoo your body, and what are you putting on your body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is symbol? Because we live in, I would say, a matrix that is heavily, coded with symbols, numbers, all of that. So things like this. And to culminate, I'm just going to ask you one more question, and I just want a general opinion. How do you feel about the role of like knowing about the Gnostic, scriptures and all of the information we have from like other documents coming out of the East and other places? What do you think about the role of the Vatican and how it plays in trying to suppress a lot of this hidden knowledge and esoteric knowledge? What do you think about that? And how do you think we should, as people of God, go about this to still awaken and transcend?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm not a historian by any means, but I have theories and things that I've heard of. And I believe that if we look at Gnosticism, when we think of like archons as these rulers of the material world that the demiurge has put in place, or if we even think of like the Anunnaki or the reptilian, like that there's these elites that are masquerading as these, extraterrestrial beings, and that again, ultimately their goal is to enslave humanity. Because more in the New Age belief, the reptilians, they feed off of our energy, right? And they realize that negative energy is also a source of nourishment, whatever it is, and you see that with propaganda, with fear, with war, with our diets, with just culture, just the way everything is created. It's meant to bring up anxiety and tension and anger, and like even like with social media, what we've seen over the years with people like battling it out in the comments and like getting enraged, right? Like honestly, when I first started kind of having some things go viral, I was overwhelmed with the amount of comments that I was getting, all of them negative. Like I would get on my phone and I would have like anxiety and I would be sweating from the level of like hate that I was getting. And I had to build a tolerance to it, honestly, you know? And so it's crazy. Like this energy is kind of what they potentially feed off of. And so if you look at it that way, in my view, the Vatican and the leaders of the early church likely were whatever these beings are. They kind of, I think that if you want to feed off of something for a long time, you have to create an illusion. You have to create a mask so that they don't really know, because otherwise everyone would just be offing themselves. We'd all just be killing ourselves. Like, okay, everything is fucked up here. These leaders are bad. The God is evil. I'm fucking killing myself. I'm out, right? Like but they needed to create this, like, we need them just content enough so that we can still manipulate them. We can still use them to build things and do things for us, things like that. And, but also like, we need them, transmitting this negative energy that we can feed off of. And so the Vatican, I believe, is composed of these very beings. And there's a lot. I mean, the Vatican is pagan. That's really my theory. The Vatican is pagan. They stem from ancient Rome, right? Where they had these pagan gods, these different deities that they were worshiping, which were probably also like archons or the Elohim, the Watchers, whatever. Like you want to, there's all these stories that kind of say the same thing. There were these beings that were like demigods or powerful rulers over humanity, and they worshiped them. And either those beings work through the people who are in the Vatican, or they are the people in the Vatican. I don't know, but something's going on where they very much decided to go in and create a doctrine that would again keep the people just happy enough to think that they were on the right track and that they were doing good. Because that's the thing people can't understand is like, well, if Christianity is like wrong or so bad, like what's so bad about it? And I'm like, well, they give you just enough truth to keep you content, but not enough to actually awaken. And that's the distortion with Jesus and the story that he is God. I mean, people are baffled by the idea that Jesus might not be God. That wasn't a thing that was discussed, that was fought over for hundreds of years before they established the Nicene Creed, where they basically decided concretely like Jesus is God. That was something that was debated. That wasn't like whole concrete truth. That was something, different people had different takes. So obviously it wasn't that clear that Jesus said this. And I think there is more proof in the Bible of Jesus saying, go to the Father, look to the Father sent me. He is distinguishing himself. Like if you step outside of it just a little bit, it makes no sense to think that Jesus is saying, I am God. He said, before Abraham was, I am, but that's a very esoteric message. Just that there's a lot of meaning behind that we could look into, what the meaning of I am was, what he's saying there. He said I and the Father are one, but that's not necessarily saying I am God. And so yeah, I mean, there are people say, oh, he was stoned for saying I am God, but in another reference he was saying I was stoned because I was saying I am the Son of God, right? So again, like there's so much misinterpretation, and I think that is like the goal. And I think honestly, my theory is Paul was either used by these beings or his message was distorted. Like, I don't think Paul was a bad guy, but like something about his message, there's so much complexity. It's like, if you, first of all, like only 6 out of the 13 letters are confirmed to be Paul's. So like some of them have been probably written by other people, like later followers of his, or people that just like slapped Paul's name to give it credibility. And so there's like also like a diversity of teachings just within Paul's theology. But then the whole idea that Jesus died as atonement for our sin, that's Pauline doctrine. Like, and the thing is, people say, well, that's in the Gospels too. But the Gospels that we have were written after Paul. We need to read the New Testament backwards to really see the picture, because Paul's letters go as early as 30 AD. So 30 years after Jesus died, Paul is converted. He's writing his letters and all this stuff. The earliest versions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and like all those gospels are 60 AD. So for 30 years, Paul's teachings were already circulating when those gospels were written. Now, mind you, there were so many Christianities that they wanted to create one cohesive message. So they needed to confirm all these things. Paul was also a Roman citizen, so probably likely favored by Roman people. He escaped death a few times because of that citizenship. Although, yes, he was imprisoned and stuff like that. Even the way he died, they gave him a more appropriate death because he was a Roman citizen. They didn't kill him in the same ways that they killed the other disciples. So Paul was he had this upper hand for being Roman. Paul also was a Hellenistic Jew, which means that he was a Pharisee, I believe, that studied in I believe like in Greek culture. So there was a lot of Greek beliefs around him, right? And so Greeks and Romans believed in a pantheon of gods, and they also believed in demigods dying for the death of the people, and like the cleansing the sin and atoning on all that. That's all pagan theology. That literally comes from paganism. And people are like, no, it's, whatever. And like, yes, Judaism also had sacrificial things. That's all black magic rituals to me. That's like really like the killing the goat, killing the animal, the blood. Like that's Satanism. That's, that's of the devil in my mind. And I believe that's actually what Jesus came to stop, was the sacrifices, the killing of the animals, the bloodshed, like all of that stuff. And some of the earliest followers of Jesus were actually vegetarian. And I think that's kind of interesting, because there might be a deeper message there on, who he was actually protecting, how he came into the temple and he released all the animals, and he said, you have turned my father's house into a den of thieves. But then if you look at the word for thieves, it could actually also mean murderers. So there's different, different aspects of Jesus' teaching that have just been whitewashed a little bit, a little bit sugar coated, and turned into this one message. And what I find interesting is, like, I was recently looking into the Nicene Creed, which is basically the establishment that Jesus is one with God, right? That he's like part of the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? That was established in 325 AD. What's interesting about the word creed, if you look at it, it's basically a statement of belief. And I think it's so interesting because our beliefs literally shape our reality. So for thousands of years, Christians have been repeating the creed that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we have been perpetuating the idea that Jesus is separate from us, that we cannot be like him, despite that being in his own teachings, that we can become like him. They've taken this creed over his actual teachings, and they have instilled a belief system that has been running through our DNA. Like, that's what it goes so deep. So of course we're basically under a spell, and I believe that the Vatican knew what they were doing. There's even theories that there's basically two men fighting for the Nicene Creed, Irenaeus and Athanasius. Irenaeus was saying Jesus is a messenger of God. He's a man, like he was a divine messenger. God ordained him. He anointed him to become like this guy to help us awaken to, right? Kind of more like the Gnostic belief. Not that he was a Gnostic, but that was kind of. And then Athanasius was like, no, Jesus is of the same substance of God. He is God, basically. And Athanasius' point of view won, right? The emperor at the time, I think Constantine, did not care. Honestly, he didn't care. He was like, you guys need to figure this out. I don't give a shit. I'm using Christianity for my gain anyways. Just like work it out. And, I just need the movement to kind of settle down. I need unity. I need the empire united and strong again. So like, let's just figure this out. So he could care less. There are theories, like little conspiracy theories, that Athanasius could have even been like a sorcerer, a magician. He was raised in Egypt. I think both of them were Egyptian, but there's theories that, he could have purposely created this creed as like casting a spell over humanity. I don't know, but that's the interesting thing to consider, is like, how deep does the Vatican's roots run in our very doctrine before it was even established, right? Like, there could have been these beings that were either manipulated or actually like pretending to be these people. I don't know for sure, but there's something very fishy about the creed, the doctrine, and how it does is create this separation between us and Jesus. And I don't believe that was his message at all. He literally said, let them be one in me as I in you, Father, and we are all one together. Like, how can that be someone who sees himself as God and says, nope? And people literally say, oh, he wanted to be worshipped. And I'm like, no, anytime you see him say, oh, good, good. He's like, why do you call me good? Only the Father is good. How can people, like, there's so much cherry picking, really. They tell me I'm cherry picking, but they cherry pick themselves, and they have all kinds of interpretations and all kinds of rationalizations for the contradictions. But really, to me, none of it makes sense anymore. And all I see is a system. I don't like to talk about Christian individuals. None of my videos, none of my context is ever going to be about an individual person. It's about a system, a corrupt organization, just like Jesus went after a system, a corrupt organization, right? And sometimes I'm like, am I wrong? I don't want to create more division. I don't want to create more separation. But then I think back to what Jesus himself did, the calling out of the hypocrisy, calling out of where they got things wrong, right? And I kind of remember, like, okay, like if he did it, then part of this must be, a pattern that plays out in humanity. And, there needs to be these awakenings where people remember and realize and recognize he was one at the time, but now we have many. We have a time period where we're unanimously, collectively waking up, and many people are becoming Christed and awakening that Christ level of consciousness, that we are one with God ultimately. And then that our path, again, to awaken and then to help others awaken too. So that's sort of where I think we need to focus less on evil and all that stuff. Although like my videos do start off with a lot of like what the church and religion has done to the message of Jesus, because I think we need to kind of reestablish it. I ultimately don't try to focus so much on the darkness. It's interesting to look into theories. We'll never know for sure. Maybe someday the truth will come out and be revealed on like what is really underlying. But I definitely believe there's some darkness going on there, or some distortion. Let's just say distortion. And they have used that to control the masses, because you can see how it has controlled the people. And in my comments, it's as clear as day to see just how brainwashed people are in these belief systems, and how they will defend them above anything else, and that it literally threatens their very identity when you call out any discrepancies, or it's just like literally like an attack on who they are. And that's a little bit scary, a little unnerving to think that that's how deep it lies, that your identity, because all I identify is a divine child of God. Nothing can threaten that. But if you identify with a religion, an institution, an organization, like, yeah, that can be threatened, because there's always going to be holes, there's always going to be contradictions, and always going to be corruption, most likely, at least in the system that we have today. I have hopes that someday we can create a heaven on earth, and we can, bring back the feminine principle and have a balanced way of creating systems and organizations that are actually, incorporating all beings, humans, animals, women, right? It's just like the missing piece, and Mother Nature itself. And I think that's where the chakra stuff plays in. It's a feminine way of healing, because it reconnects us with our energy and our cycles. It's rhythmic, just like Earth has her cycles. When they pulled out the divine feminine out of the Holy Trinity, and they made it, all masculine, they disconnected us from the divine feminine, and from the cycles, and from our connection and our rhythm to nature. Just like all this crunchy movement, the holistic movement of like, oh, go put your feet in the ground, go look at the sun, go get morning light in your eyes, eat organic, right? This is the feminine principle. We need to reconnect with that balance of what we missed out on, because we've been so disconnected, and all it's created is greed, corruption, addiction, in every system, school, medicine, politics, government, everything, every system we can look at, it's all been patriarchal, and it all has corruption. And that's because there's no feminine principle to balance it, and so that's kind of where I try to focus my energy on.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I really believe that as well, that right now, what you see out there is that lack of feminine, that divine energy principle in society and in our spirit. And I think as well, it's very scary to see people who don't like to question. They don't like to read or just hear another alternative source. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. No one's saying that, for example, we had this discussion, no one's saying that you have to believe me. No one's saying that you have to believe you, but that you're open to hearing other points of views. And I think that's super important to just grow as a person and be able to exchange views and not have it be something that's like taboo, So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being with me today and sharing your insight on Gnosticism and the Matrix. It was like an honor, because I have not found anyone who has had that much depth of information in explaining this topic. And if you enjoyed Elizabeth and you want to know a little bit more about her, I'm going to link her TikTok, I guess, and your page also in the podcast below. And remember to subscribe to sacredmindshift.com so you never miss an event or an exciting episode. And God bless, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dolly. Appreciate you.